Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video we are going to be reading through and translating part 2 of the Old Saxon Genesis. And if you want to see part 1, it will be linked in the description of this video, as will the slides that I'm using here. Now, the Old Saxon Genesis, when I say it's divided into part 1, 2, and 3, this is not a natural separation within the text. This is the fact that we don't have the whole text preserved in manuscripts. So part 1 is broken off prematurely, and we don't have all of parts 2 or part 3 either, unfortunately. It would be lovely to be able to read through the whole of the poem like we can with many Old English epic poems. But nonetheless, let's get on with it. If you want to have a go at translating the Old Saxon yourself, feel free to pause the video and write out your translation of what's on the screen, and then you can check it against what I say. And as usual, forgive me if my Old Saxon pronunciation is not the best. I would recommend a channel like Scott Shell's if you want a more precise linguistic understanding of it. We're going to be approaching this text more from a literary perspective here. So, without further ado, let's get on with it. Síðoða þvóte seridon, hafða sunjai waracht bitra anis bróðar. Liet ina under baka ligjanan, einam diapundala drora waragana. Lífas losan, legarbed waran, guman an griata. Då sprak God selbo två, waldan midis wordun, was reid anis ugi. Fem banan jebolgan, fragala he hafði his bróðar två, kindi jungan guman. Då sprak eft kain angegen, hafða mid his handum harðam wervek mikkel, wam dadium je waracht. Fius wereld was so svíðo besmitten an sundiun. Ni þess sorgun ni skal, quad he, gomian hvar hie ganga, ni et mi got ni je bot, that is huerigin hier huordian dorfri, wardon an þessar wereldi. Wanda he svíðo, that he be helan machti herran sinum, thia þadi bedernian, þó sprak eft und sadrochtin två. Al havas tu so je werekot, quad he. So ti thina wereldi makwesan thin hugi rewig, thes thu me thinum handon judedos, that thu worthy thines bróðar bano, nu he blodig ligit, wundun warrig, thes ni hafða he eniga je worchte te thi, sundia je swochta, tho thu ina nu aslagan hevias, dodan je doanan. Okay, so what does this all mean? This account and most of this second part of the Old Saxon Genesis is telling about Cain's killing of his brother Abel. So, síðoða þvóte seridon, he departed from them to his lodgings. Hafða sundia je waracht bitran his bróðar. He had worked or committed a bitter sin, bitra sundia, on his brother, against his brother. Liet inna under baka ligjanan, and then also drora waragana. So Cain, liet, he lays him down in a under baka, sort of behind him basically. Ligjanan enam diapundala, lying in a deep dale. Dror waragana. That's a difficult word to pronounce, but also what it means is wearied by loss of blood, which is quite a cool word. Lífas losan, bereft of life. Legarbed waran, to watch over his sick bed, or to, I guess, guard his sick bed. Guman an greata, the man in the earth. Now, this idea of guarding the sick bed is an interesting one, which I believe shows up also in the Wife's Lament as a poem, saying that she has to abide in her sickbed. I'm not certain if it's in the Wife's Lament or maybe it's the Wanderer, but this concept of a sick or a deceased person, I guess, guarding their sickbed almost as if they can't go on to the afterlife, they can't go on to heaven because they've been killed, whether it's because they're not in a state of grace or because they were killed in a state of murder, as in they were murdered by somebody else, by somebody who was part of their family, perhaps. It seems to be that somebody who dies under those conditions, their soul doesn't necessarily go on, but it stays behind, perhaps near the body, and it guards this bed. Although the bed, legar bed, there could also be a euphemism for the ground, for a grave. And indeed, it says, Cain left Abel as a guman an greata, like a man in the dirt. So that would make sense. Thwo sprak im God selvotwo. Then God himself spoke to him. Waldan mit his woorden, the ruler with his words. Was im reid an his hugi. God, this is, was angry, red, im, against them, an his hugi, in his mind. Them banan yebolgan, I guess, enraged against the slayer, the killer. And then God, fragada huarhe havdi his brother twa. God asked where he had his brother, the kind jongan guman, the child young man. Tho sprak im eft Cain an Jagen. Then Cain spoke again in response to God. Havda im midis handun haram werk mikkel wam dadiuni waracht. So he had with his hands, midis handum, haram werk mikkel, a great harm work. And the use of the word haram here, not related to the Islamic haram, that would be very funny. It might harken back to this sense of spiritual damnation that we see in the first part of the Old Saxon Genesis. Now, of course, it just means harm. It's a cognate of the modern English word harm. But Adam says to Eve afterwards that Thesan haram yiried, that God prepared the suffering of hell for them, for mankind. And so likewise, this haram werek, a harm work, could refer to a deed which is sort of sinful enough to damn a person to hell. Because although this is described as a sundia, there are many sins in Old Saxon, none of which are necessarily described as a haram werk. And if you look at the Old Saxon Confession, for instance, which I've got a video about that will come out at some point on this channel, they don't make reference to a penitent confessing having committed a haram werk, but just regular sundia. So this word here might refer to a work or a sin which is so great that it damns a person to hell. And he committed this midis handun, with his hands, and also with wam darion, with shameful deeds. This world was so swido besmitten an sundion. This world was so greatly besmitten with sin. Ni ek thes sorgun ni skal. I do not need to worry about this. Quadhe, said Cain. Gormian huarhe ganga, to pay attention to where he goes. Ni et mi God ni yebod, nor did God command it to me. Now this is a weird one, right? Because Cain is addressing God directly here. It literally says Cain spoke in response, and God initially spoke to Cain. So it's weird that he's addressing God in the third person here. Anyway, God did not command it to me, that is that I needed to take care of him, basically. Wardon an thesora weldi, and I would have to protect him in this world. Juan de Jesuido, he hoped, basically, greatly, that he behelan machti herlantinum, theadadi bidernian. So he hoped that he might, behelion is to cover, theadadi, that deed, herlantinum, from his Lord, and also to bedernian, to conceal it. So Cain was hoping by not answering to God where his brother was that he could hide the deed. Thor sprak im eft usa drochten twa. Then our Lord spoke to him again. Al havas tu soy werekot. You have worked everything, all, so in this way, quod he, said he. So thi ti thinardo werldi magwesan thin hugi hriwi. Therefore, thin hugi, your mind, magwesan, may be hriwi, remorseful or ruing on account of this. Tithinara werldi, in your world. Fes thu mid thinum handum judedos, because you, with your hands, acted, thought in a way that, fu worthy thinis brotharbano, that you would become your brother's killer. Nu he bloedig dik ligit, now he lies bloody, wundun worig, sort of, wearied by wounds. Although, of course, Cain is actually dead. Thes ni havda he enia you wurchte te thi. Because he had not he ni havda enia anything you wurchte te thi committed against you. So Abel had not committed anything against Cain, is what God's saying. Sundya you suachta, he had not sought to commit any sins against you. Fu ina no aslagan hevias. Nonetheless, you have now slain him. Dodan yeduanan. You have done him dead, literally. You have made him dead. So, on to this part. And as usual, you can feel free to take a pause and translate it on your own. Is dror sinkit nu an erda, sweit sundar ligit, theoseola huaravat, vieges jarmarmor, an godes willian. Dror ropit, iste drochtina selvun, en die sagat, huethia dadi frimida, that men an thesun middel garden. Die mag im enig man van swider werda fra wirdikan, an werda rikia, an bitron baladadion. Van thu an thynum broder havas fyrin wergi fremd. Thu an forrachtun warð Cain after them quidiun drochtinas, quath that he wisse jardo, that isni machti werdan waldant wicht, an werlstundu dadio bidernit. So ek is nu mag drubundian, hugi, quad he. Berdan an minum breastun, thes ik minam broder sloeg, thurch min handmegen. Nu weet ik dat ik skal an thinum heti livian, forth an thinum fiunshepi. Nu ik mi sa firna jededa, so mi mina sundia nu swidaran tunkiat, misdat mera. Vat thin mildi hugi, so ik thes nu wirdig ni bium, waldant thie guoto. That thu mia latas levas tingas, dianono atuemas. Nu ek ni welda mina treu haldan, hugi with them dinum lutra moda. Nu wet ik, dat ik hier ni mag enige huila livian, wandem meg antwirkit, so what so mi an thisum wega findet, as lechet mi bithesun sundion. Right, so, what does it all mean? This is a very dramatic first line. Is roar sinket nu an erda. His blood sinks now into the earth. Sweat sundar liget. His bodily fluids, referring to his blood, lies spread out. Theoseola huarvat. Which, by the way, that Old Saxon word seola, it's beautiful. It's so much nicer than the Old English sawal. The soul departs. The guest Yaramwat and Goddess William. The spirit departs into God's desire, into God's will. Dror wapit is tedrachtina selvun. Forgive the noise. His blood cries out to the Lord and says, Endisagat, who committed the deed? that main and thesun middle garden, who committed that sin in this middle earth? Ni mag im enig marn than sweeter weir wirikian an werldorikia an bitran balodarion. So, nor may any man then of the men, or any one of the men, fra wirikian, commit sin, a greater sin, an werldrikia, an bitron baladadion, in the world kingdom, in a more bitter or in bitterer evil deeds. Van thu, antinum broda havas firden werechie fremed, than the crime work, and notice that suffix or that stem werek, which was used in the previous bit to refer to the haram werek. So the killing of Abel is described as a haram werek and also as a firin werek. So no man can commit a worse crime in the worldly kingdom with his bitter bale deeds than you who have killed your brother here. Thu an forrachtun warð Cain after them quidiun drochtinas. Then Cain became warð an forrachtun, afraid, after them quidiun drochtinas, after those sayings of the Lord. Quath that hie wisiaro said that he knew well that isni machti werdan waldan wicht, that nothing of his could be hidden, waldan, from the Lord. None of his deeds, dadeo, an werel stundu. So, that isni machti werdan waldan wicht an werel stundu dadeo bidernid. All of that means Cain knew well that none of his deeds could become hidden from the Lord in this world. So, ik is nu mag drobundian hugi. Therefore, I may now I may now endure drobundian, my mind, quad he, berdan an minum breostun, I must carry it in my breast. Thes ik minan broda sloch through min handmaking, because I slew my brother through my handiwork, through the power of my hand. Nu wait ik that ik skal an vinum heti livion. Now I know that I must live in your hatred. Forth an vinum vion skepi. Henceforth, ik skal livion, I must live an vinum vion skepi, in your fiendship. So we have friendship in English, and they also have that in Old Saxon. And this is just the opposite of that. So this is enmity or hatred. Nu ik me thesa firna yededa. Now that I committed this sin. Now this use of the me here is interesting. It could be dative or it could be accusative. It's more likely dative because we already have an accusative here. So now that I have committed this crime, and then we have the me. So the dative can have a lot of different meanings in Old Saxon. It can be instrumental. So in theory, it could mean like using myself, but that's unlikely in this particular context. What's much more plausible is that it sort of indicates purpose. So I committed this crime towards myself or against myself. So it's this really curious idea, at least from a theological perspective, that Cain's sin, or just perhaps even any kind of sin, harms the sinner as much, not as much as, but it harms the sinner as well as the person who is sinned against, which is quite an interesting thought. So mi minasundia nus vidarantunkiat. Therefore my crimes now appear greater to me. Mistad mera, my misdeed appears greater than mildi hugi, than your merciful mind. So Cain is saying that I think, based on what you've said, that the sins that I've committed are too great for your mind, for your mercy. So ik thes nu wirrich ni bium, and therefore I am not worthy of this. Waldant thie guodo, you good ruler, that thou me alatas ledas thingas, that you may forgive me of the awful thing, tianono atuemas, that you may wash away my crimes. Nu ik ni welda mina trewa haldan. Now I did not wish to keep my faith. Hugi with them thinum hlutram wada. I did not wish to protect my mind against, in face of your cleaner mind. This is a kind of interesting construction. I would say it basically means that seeing that God was sort of perfection, Cain did not wish to strive for that. He did not wish to keep his mind on the path towards God's perfection, is what I'm reading that as saying, and therefore he gave in to sin. Nu wait ik, now I know, that ik hier niet mag any huila livion, that I may not live here any more. Want me unwillikit. Because whatever finds me, what me unwillikit is like, I cannot live here any longer. Because, so what so me and this wega findit, whatever will find me on the path, as lechet me, bithesun sundion. It will slay me on account of this sin. So this is, of course, the a reference to the fact that all the creatures of the earth shall curse you. And so Cain is banished from all of human society. Thor sprak eft selvo angegen hevandes waldand. Hier skalt thu noch nu, quad he, Livian an thessun lande lango huila. Thoch thu sus aledet sis, mit firinum befangan, thoch willig thi fridu setean, toian sulik tekian. So thu an trewa macht wesan an thesse rowerelde, thoch thu is wirdig nisis. Vluchtig skalt thun thoch en die vredig forthwardas nu Livian an thessum landa, so lango so thu dit licht wardas. For huatan skulun thi lutraliodi, thunis skalt jo further kuman tethines heran sprako. Wesleyan thar med wardan thinon, wadan die state thines broder raka bitter an heli, so gang thanan mit grimohui, havda ina god selbo swido for sakanan. Sorga ward thar tho yikudit adama and die evun. Inwit mikil, iro kindes qualm, that heini mosta quick livion. Thes warth admas hugi in ambreos un suido an sorgun, thwo he wissa his sunu dodan. So warth is octium modar, the thanamaku foda, barn be in obreostun. Theo suo biodag was crewi wadi, thwo warth irdo hugi selag. Very sad section. So, Thor sprak eft selvo angegen hevan is waldand. Then sprak eft selvo, he himself spoke once again, or rather, Waldan selvo, the ruler himself, sprak eft angegen, spoke to him again. So this is Cain. The ruler of heaven spoke to Cain again. Hier skalt thu noch nu, Livian an thessum lande. So here you shall still live in this land for a long time, lango huila, quad he, said the Lord. Thoch thu sis aledit sis, even though you are so hated, mid filinum befangan, you are captured by the men. Thoch willik thi fridu sitian. Nonetheless, trying to think of how to translate this, you must set, or whatever kind of peace may be set upon you, essentially. Torian tulik tekian. Whatever sign is set upon you, or is borne out. Thus, so, thu an trewa macht wesan. Thus, you must remain, wesan in this case, rather than to be, antreva, in truth, anthesero werelde, in this world. Thoch thu is wirdig ni sis, even though you're not worthy to be in this world. Fluchtig skalt thu thoch en die vredig voortwaardas nu Livian and thesum landa. So from now on you must live as a fleeing fluchtig and a vredig and a banished man forthwardas from henceforth an thesum landa, in this land. So long so thu liacht fit liacht waros. For as long as you shall protect waras fit liacht, your light, which is an interesting way of understanding, life and the soul. For huatan skulun the lutrach liudi, the cleaner people must hate you. Thuni skaltio further kuman, you may not any more come terthines heron sprako, to your Lord's conversation. Thuni skalt further Wesleyan, you may no longer discuss there min wardandinon with your words. So you, Cain, cannot speak to the society of the just. And this is an interesting thought because, as we'll see later on, Cain is supposed to spawn a whole species of monsters, and we also see in the Old English poem Beowulf that Grendel and his mother and the various monsters are said to be the descendants of Cain. And quite interesting, one of the big distinctions between the monsters and the humans, even though there are lots of parallels between the two, and there are sort of some implications that Grendel and Grendel's mother, in addition to being the descendants of Cain, may be in some ways people who were banished, or may be symbolic of people who were banished from a medieval society. But in spite of all of these parallels, one of the features which distinguishes the monstrous from the merely banished is that they do not speak. The dragon, Grendel's mother, do not use words in Beowulf, although they can use objects which have words written on them as an example. So, likewise here, perhaps what this means is that you may no longer have conversation in this place with your words. It might be referencing the fact that Cain can no longer speak using human languages. Thor ging in Mathanon mit Grimohugi. Then Cain departed mit Grimohugi with a grim or an ugly mind. Havda ina got selvo suido farsakanan. God himself had forsaken him. Sordaga warth tharthwo yekudit Adama and Evun. So the sorrow became known Yekudit, Adama and Evun, to Adam and Eve. Inwid Mikil, the great injustice, Irokindis qualm, the killing of their child, that he ni mosta quick livion, that he was not able to stay alive, basically. Fes warth Adamas hugi. Therefore, Adam's mind became in Ambreaston, within his breasts, because this is an important point. Unlike the Romans, the Old Saxons thought of your mind, both in sense of your rational mind, but also your emotional mind, as existing in your chest rather than your head. So that's why Adam's mind and his thoughts is in Ambreaston, it's within his breasts. Swido an Sorgon, his mind was greatly sorrowful. Vorhe wisa, his sunu Dordan, when he knew that his son was dead. This is an accusative infinitive construction here with sunu Dordan, so when he knew that his son was dead. So warth is ok thiu moda. Thus also his mother became sorrowful. The mother fethana maruhuoda, the mother who fed that boy. Barn bi irdo breostun, she fed the child at her breasts. For sil bloda was crevi wadi. She washed then the bloody garment. For warth irdo huri serag. When she washed the bloody garment, her mind became serag, sorrowful or painful. Really sad part of the poem here. So on to the next one. Beiddo was tho an sorgun jak irdo barnas dot, thes heritas hinfart jak that mit is handun for theida ken an sulikun qualma. Sio ni havdun, fwo noch kindo than meir levanderdo an them liachta, botan thana eina, thie thwo a leidit was waldande, be is farworach them. Thar ni havdun siu eniga wunia, to noordliko yinuman. Wand nie sulikan ni the hof. That he ward is brother bano. Thes theo beoion ward, sinhiun twem, ser herta. Oft siu thes gordonunde angriate stunden, sinhiun samad, quadun dat sia wisin, that dat sundia ireden, that ni mosten after vi wardos, theinos dichan. Tholoron siu beidhu mikla mordquala, und dat eft machtig God, Herr heavenes ward, irdo hugi water, that wurden odana erbi wardos, theinos endi thiornun. Thigun after well, wochsun wanliko, juit linodun, spahas broca. Sporde the machta is handiwerk, heilag drochten, that ward sunu jiboran. Them squapun siu seth te naman, warum wardum. Them wastum lech hevanas waldand engi hugi guadan, gamnikan gang. He was goda wirdig, mildi was he an his moda. So thana is manuel, thea yo mit sulikarda huldi mot heran theonun. Alright, so, what does all of this mean? Beiddo was tho an sorgum jak barnas thought. So we'll start with the nominative. The death barnas of their child was for them beiddo, it was for both of them, an sorgun, it was a sorrowful thing. Hinfart thes helidas, the departure of this hero, because, Irl Barnas Dod and Thes Helios Hinfarth, these are very similar constructions, and this is quite a characteristic feature of both Old Saxon and Old English poetry, is the repetition of a subject, or even an object, with synonyms, just for the poetic and metrical purposes. Jak that midis handum vordeda kain an sudikun quama. And Cain had committed that against them midis handum, with his hands, an sulikun qualma, in such a killing. So it was sorrowful to them, both the fact that their child has died and that Cain had committed this crime against them with his hands. Siu ni havdun thuo noch kindu than meir, livandero an them liachta. So they did not have yet than mer any more kindo livandero of living children an them liachta in that night. But on thana ena, except for that one, thieth war I laid it was Waldanda, who was so hated by the ruler, be his farwarchtun, according to his transgressions. Thar ni havdun siu eniga wunia, then they did not have any hope toward nordlicho ginuman. They had not taken up any hope out of necessity. Juan sie sulikan need afwaf. When they, I guess, lamented such a need afwaf, when such persecutions, rather, I should say, arose. So when such persecutions arose, they did not have any hope that he ward is brother Bano. They had no expectation that Cain would become his brother's killer. So they hadn't anticipated this. Thes thor Beorn Warth. This came to pass for both of them. Sinu and Twain, for both couples, ser umbiherta, there was a soreness in their hearts. Oft siu thes gornunde angriata yistorden. Often they stood upon the earth, gornunde, lamenting on account of this. Siniun sama, the couples gathered together. Quadun, they said that sia wisin, that they knew that that iro sundia yedaden, that they're basically that iro sundia, that their sins yedaden did that thing to them. The syntax is really weird here and kind of backwards, but basically they knew that they would not have, that they knew that their sins, Adam and Eve's sins, had brought this about. Of course, the original sin had brought this about. That ni muostin after erbe guardos thegnos dichon, so that the Thanos, the Thanes, ni muostin, may not be able, dichon, to prosper after erbe guardos, after the heirs, essentially. So after these two heirs, one of whom is now dead and the other whom is hated by God, they were lamenting that none of their offspring would prosper. Tholadon siu beidhiu mikla mordquala. They both endured the great mordquala, the great death slaying. It's a very dramatic word. Und that eft machtig God, until mighty God, Herr heavenes ward, irhugi water, the ruler, the protector of heaven, heavenes ward, irhugi, their mind, water, he improved their mind. So he cured their depression, he cheered them up. That wurden ordana erviwardas, because there will be for them, or there will come to be ordana erviwardas, other heirs for them. Thanos and Lithiornan, boys and girls basically. Thigun after well, they will prosper well afterwards. Walksun wanliko, they grew beautifully. Gewit linodun, they acquired great intelligence and spaha spraka, and wise speakings basically. Spoorda thie machta is handi werk helag drochten. So he advanced this. Thie machta, he who was able to, is handiwerk. So the Holy Lord, who was able to do this, advanced his handiwork, and this being the handiwork of ensuring that Adam and Eve have offspring. That ward sun geboren, so that a son was born for them. Them squopun siu seth tenaman, so they chose Seth tenaman as a name, wardon, with wise words. Them wastum lech heavenas waldond. So the ruler of heaven gathered those with those clothing. Also, hugigwadan, a good mind, a gumnikan gang, and a appropriate departure, essentially a joyful departure. So the Lord, I guess, ensured, but this is what the word lech is meaning here, that he would have a good mind and he would have a good death. So Seth wasn't going to suffer the same thing as Abel had. So what this is the ruler of heaven gathered along with those crops, those fruits, that he would have a good mind and a fruitful and a pleasant departure. Hey, and that's Seth that we're talking about here, the child of Adam and Eve. Seth was Goda worthy, he was worthy before God. Mildi was he, im an his mother, he was kind to him in his mind. So thana is Manuel, thea yo mid sulikara huldi mot heran thionun. And so likewise, any of the men was good to that man who who must serve their lord Heron min sulikardohuldi with such protection. So what this is saying is Seth was worthy to the Lord, he was kind, God was kind to him in his mind. And also any one of the men was kind to Seth who had to serve the Lord under such protection. So this is saying that in order to stay in God's good graces, the Hebrew people also had to be nice to Seth. And here we have come upon the final section of the second part of the Old Saxon Genesis. As usual, feel free to take a pause and read through and translate this on your own. And let's get reading it. It's got the Antichrist in this bit, so it's very fun. Hie lovada thuo meist liodo barnun, godas huldi gumun. Thanan quamun guodaman, warden visa, jewit linodun, theinos jethachte, endi thigun after a well. Than quamun eft van cana crafta galiudi, helidos hardum wada. Havdun im hugi strangan, reidan willian, ni weldun waldan das leira leistion, ac habdun in leidan stríð, wohsun im wirðisliko. That was thiu wirðsa jiburð, kuman fran cana. Begonun im kopun thuo werðas wif undarþuisk. Thus varð awerðit san sedas jesiti, varð segio folk meinu je menged, engi wordun manna barn. Liodi leida, them fit liocht je skuop, botan that iro ein habda erlas je hugdi. Thegan lika je thacht, was je thungin man, wis en die wordspach, havda je wit mikkel. Enoch was je hetan, je hier an erdu warth manum te marðum over þessan middelgard, that inna hier so quickana kuningo thie betto, livet nian anis lichaman. So hier jo an þessun liachtan I starap, ac so je halada inna hier hevanas waltand, en I inna dar je setta, þar je simlon mot wesan an union, und dat inna eft an þessa wereld stendet, her hevanas warde helido barnum, liodion telero, van hier ook die leido commit, dat hier antichrist alla theotha, werdat awerdet, van he mit wapnu skal werdan enok te banon, edion skarpun, durch his handmegen. Hwyrðinfit thiu seola, die geest an guadan weg, en die godas engel commit, Wirðikit inna, wamskadon wapnas edjun. Wirðikit antichrist alder belosit, die fiunt befelit. Folk wirðit eftir forvant he godet rikia, gumno jesiti langa huila, en I steidim sidar þitt land jesunt. Ha, wow. It's a long passage. I just wanted to fit all of the last bit into one page as opposed to spreading it out over multiple sections, because I reckon 5 is a good number to have for these slides. So let's press on with it. He loved the mest liodo barnium. So he loved, this is Seth we're talking about, he loved, most of all, most, liodio barnum, the children of the people. Godas huldi gumun, the people within, this dative here without any preposition is meaning like within or under huldi godas, the protection of God. Thanan quamun, guadaman, whence the good men came, warden wisa, the men who were wise in their words, yewit linodun, they gathered wisdom or they gathered intellect, theinos yethachte, they gathered also the wisdom or the thoughts of the thanes, or the thane's thoughts, and they thigun after a well, and they prospered after that well. And by the Ithachte Thegnos, it's probably referring to Seth's words, basically. So they listened to his words and they prospered. Than quamun eft van kaina krafta galiudi. Now this is they're contrasting this here. So thanan quamun guadaman. So good men came from Seth, the child of Adam and Eve, born after Cain and Abel. Thon kwamon eft van kaina kraftagaliudi. So then afterwards, powerful people came van kaina from Cain. And it's not said who Cain copulates with, but they just come from him. Helidos hard-minded heroes. Havdun im hui strangan. They had a strong mind, redan willian, and an angry will. Ni welden waldan das leira leistion. They did not wish to follow the Lord's commandments. Ak havdun im ledan strid. But they had loathsome quarrelling. Now, bear in mind this kind of, I guess, concept is met also in Beowulf, as I mentioned earlier, where they describe a very similar thing, how the monsters that one sees in the poem Beowulf come as the descendants of Cain, and it is because they did not want to obey the Lord's teachings. Voksun im wirðisliko. That was the wirðsa burt. This is very interesting. So they grew in a worse manner than the descendants of Adam. And this is, of course, referring to the fact that they grow into these distorted, monster-like creatures. But the fact that they are, like, originally human sort of implies that they're not fully a different race. This is a common, I guess, misconception put into place by fantasy games, that concepts like Ilfe, like elves, and dwerg, like the dwarves in Old English poetry, the image is often presented that these are completely different races with different genealogies from humans, like the fantasy races in something like Lord of the Rings. But this is not the case. They all actually do come from a single genetic stock, being ultimately Adam and Eve. It's just that the lines of Adam and Eve break off, one of them through Cain, who creates, I guess, the evil humans, and Seth, who creates the virtuous humans. So they grow in a different manner depending on who is their ultimate ancestor. So, walking in Wirðisliko, they grew in a worse manner. That was the Wirðsa Yibur. That was the worst lineage, Kuman van Kaina, that had come from Cain. Begunun im kopum tho werdas wif undartwisk. This is rather funny. So the weras, the men, begunum im kopun, they began to sell to each other wif, their wives, undartwisk, reciprocally. So they were committing the sin of cuckoldry, presumably voluntarily. Thus warth awerdit son setas yesiti. On account of which Seth's journey was soon perverted or corrupted. Warth segio folk menu yemenged. The people of the warriors, segio folk, warth yemenged, it became enmeshed, menu, with sin. Endi wurden mano barn, and the children of men became liudileva, a loathsome people. Them that liocht yisquop, for whom, presumably there's a god here, who shaped yisquop that liocht, that light. So the implication here is that the descendants of Cain began to, I guess, pimp out their wives to each other, and this sort of corruption led to the descendants of Seth being corrupted as well, and so the people became enmeshed with sin. Botan that iro ein havda erlas Yehugdi, except that the one thought possessed the earls of them. Thegan lika yithacht, a sort of noble thought. Was im yithungin man. They had a wise man, or a suitable man, Wiesindi Wordsbach, a wise and loquacious, or like good with words, man. Havda Yewit Michel, he had a great intelligence. Enoch was he a Hatan, he was called Enoch. So what this is saying is that all of this would have happened because the descendants of Cain started to pimp out their wives to the descendants of Seth, and this was starting to corrupt the people. But they would have been completely corrupted if it weren't for this wise man called Enoch who came along to advise them. Thie hier an earth warth manum te mardum. So this man who warth came to be on earth, te mardum manum, as instruction for men. Obarthesan Middlegard, over this middle earth, that ina hier so quicana kungothie betsto livendian anis lichaman so hie yo an thesun liachtani starab. This is a really difficult passage, but it basically means that Enoch was instituted as instruction for men on earth, across this middle earth, and because he was set up as instruction for men, the best of the kings, Ina hier so quicana livendian, him thus living alive, on his lichaman, in his body. Here, and that here is referring to the best of the kings. Yo an thesun liachta, they could not start up, they could not kill him or starve him off. An thesun liachta, within this light. So because Enoch is sort of ordained by God to instruct the Hebrew people and to take them away from the corrupting influence of Cain, the granddaughters of Cain, because they have Enoch's influence, God has instituted it so that Enoch cannot be killed, even by the best kings of the time. Ak so yehalda ina hier hevanas waldand. So, but the ruler of heaven thus held him, Yehaloda ina, and the ina thardi setta, and set him up there. Thar hie simlon wat wesan an so that he must always remain there, an in joy. Und hat ina eft an thessa wereld sentit, her hevanas ward Helidobarnum. So until the ruler, the protector of heaven, Heavenasward, Sendit Ina sends him again on this world, into this world, Helidobarnum, for the children of the heroes. So what this is saying is that Enoch may at some point come again, is what this is saying. Liodion telero, as instruction for the people. So Enoch is presently in heaven, according to this poem, and he will come again to earth when God sends him as instruction for the people once again. Than hier ok thie ledo cumet, when the calamity comes here, that hier Antichrist alla theoda werar avertit. This is really cool. So when the destruction comes, so that the Antichrist here, aware that he corrupts alla theoda, all the peoples, and the werat, the war band. Than he mid wapnu skal werthan enochate banon. Then he, the Antichrist, skal werthan, shall become Tebanon as a slayer, Enocha for Enoch, mid wapnu, with his weapon. Egion scarapon, through his hand making, through sharp edges, via his handicraft, by the Antichrist's power. Whithivit Theuseola, the soul departs, the geist on Guadan weg, his soul departs onto the good path. And bear in mind, Whithivit Theuseola, the geist on Guadan weg. We saw this exact same construction earlier when it was referring to the killing of Abel and Abel's soul, how it departed from this world. Here we are. Theuseola huarovat thiegest. So they are using those two couplets to, I guess, draw a parallel between Enoch being killed by the Antichrist and with Abel being killed by Cain. So, what vet jag säga att jag get on going way? And the God's angel commit, and God's angel will come. Williket in a wams Godon wapnas edjon. So God's angel will make him, and that's referring to the Antichrist, wam skadon. He will basically make avenge, cause of revenge, basically. Wapnas edjun, by the edges of his weapon. With it Antichrist aldrig be lost. The Antichrist will be released from life. The fiun befallet. The enemy will be killed. Folk with it, if you whorvan take God's rike. The people will be once again brought back to God's rike, to God's kingdom. Now bear in mind that this Yehorvan is the past participle of Hwirvan here. So it's the same verb that's being used for the soul going off to heaven and the people converting to God, because of course this battle between Enoch and the Antichrist, and then the Antichrist with God's angel, is a reference to the book of Revelation and the apocalypse, which is going to come about at the end of the world. So when the people convert, this is the final conversion, when the whole world is about to be consumed, basically to be ended, and all of the humans are going to go off to heaven or to hell, as it may be. So that's why the people are described with the same verb as the soul is, because at this point the people are quite soon to become souls, or rather the sort of physical world is about to be destroyed. Gumano Yesidi Langahwila, so the companions of the men are going to be like taken up to God's kingdom. Langahwila, for a long time. Well, it's eternity, it's not just a long time. And he stayed im Sidorthit land isunt, and that healthy land state awaits there for them, Sidor, forever. So what this is all saying is that the God will avenge Enoch's slaying at the hands of the Antichrist, and then the people will go up to heaven, where they will be in the healthy, prosperous land forever and ever. Amen. All of that good stuff. So, there we go. We have read through the entirety of the second part of the Old Saxon Genesis. Thank you guys so much for watching if you've made it this far. I really hope these videos help some people, or even just inspire some people to start learning Old Saxon, because this is really interesting poetry to read, I think. If you want me to teach you Old Saxon or any of the other languages that I do here on this channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon, which will be linked in the description of this video. You can also join my Discord server, where we have a fun community of like-minded people. We often share memes and sometimes do movie nights together. So it's a great community. You should come and join us. And until next time, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice day. Bye, everyone.